Eleanor Whitman had everything: a corner office on the 42nd floor, a $100 million company, and the respect that came with being untouchable. But in less than 60 seconds, a quiet delivery man in a brown uniform would shatter everything she thought she knew about intelligence, worth, and the dangerous line between gratitude and love. Marcus Reed was invisible to her world, just another face delivering packages to the glass tower where power lived, until the moment he opened his mouth and solved the crisis that 5 Harvard MBAs couldn't crack. What Eleanor didn't know was that saving her company would cost her everything she'd built her identity on, and choosing Marcus would force her to confront the one thing she'd never admitted: that she'd been living behind walls of privilege so high, she'd forgotten what it meant to truly see another person. Some love stories begin with a meet cute. This one begins with a reckoning that will leave both their worlds forever changed. If you're watching this, subscribe and tell me where you're from, because this story of unexpected love and shattered assumptions is just getting started. The elevator hummed quietly as it carried Eleanor Whitman to the 42nd floor. She checked her phone for the 3rd time in 2 minutes. The board meeting started in 20 minutes, and the quarterly operations report still had gaps that made her stomach tight. Eleanor stepped into the marble lobby of Whitman Industries, her heels clicking against the polished stone. The morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the reception desk. Everything looked perfect, clean, controlled, just how she needed it. "Good morning, Ms. Whitman." Lydia Chen looked up from her computer, already holding a steaming cup of coffee. "Your mother called. She wants to confirm dinner tonight." "Thank you." Eleanor took the coffee and headed toward her office. "Any word from Tom about the logistics numbers?" "He's still working on it. Should have something in 15 minutes. Eleanor nodded and disappeared behind her office door. She set the coffee on her desk without drinking it and stared out the window at the city below. Tiny cars moved through the streets like toys. People walked on sidewalks, hurrying somewhere important. From up here, everything looked simple. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother. "Looking forward to dinner, darling. I have news about the Henderson contract." Eleanor sighed. Even family dinners came with business attached. She loved her mother, but Helen Whitman had opinions about everything, especially about how Eleanor ran the company their family had built over 30 years. A knock at her door pulled her back to the moment. "Come in." Tom Alvarez entered with a thick folder and a worried expression. "We have a problem." Eleanor's chest tightened. "How big?" "The Phoenix rollout is stuck. The shipping schedules don't match the warehouse capacity. We're looking at a 3-week delay, maybe more." 3 weeks? Eleanor stood up. "Tom, this is a $100 million project. We can't just stop." "I know. I've run every scenario. The numbers don't work. The delivery system we designed is hitting bottlenecks we didn't see coming." Eleanor walked to the window again. Below, a delivery truck pulled up to their building. A man in a brown uniform got out, carrying a stack of packages. He moved with purpose, checking each address carefully before walking inside. "Get everyone in the conference room," she said. "Now." Marcus Reed balanced the packages against his hip while he signed for the delivery at the front desk. The security guard smiled and waved him through. Marcus had been delivering to this building for 2 years. He knew most of the staff by name. "Morning, Frank," he said to the building manager who was checking the elevator panels. "Hey, Marcus, how's your route today?" "Not bad. Busy, but that's good." Marcus shifted the packages. "You fixing that elevator again?" "Always something." Frank shrugged. "These fancy buildings. They look perfect, but there's always something breaking." Marcus laughed. "Yeah, I know what you mean." He took the working elevator to the 38th floor. The law firm there always got packages on Tuesdays. As he walked back to the elevator, he heard voices coming from the 42nd floor. Loud voices, worried voices. Marcus didn't mean to listen. The elevator was slow, and sound carried in the marble hallway. He could hear pieces of conversation through the conference room door. 3 weeks behind schedule. $1 million. Shipping routes don't make sense. Marcus frowned. He'd heard about shipping problems before. In his last job, before he started driving for the delivery company, he'd worked in logistics for a smaller firm. He'd learned how shipping schedules worked, how warehouses operated, how timing could make or break a delivery system. The elevator dinged. Marcus stepped inside, but the voices stuck in his head. Something about the conversation bothered him, but he couldn't put his finger on what. Eleanor stared at the whiteboard covered in numbers and shipping routes. 5 executives sat around the polished conference table, all looking as frustrated as she felt. "Let me understand this," she said slowly. "We designed a system that can't actually deliver what we promised." Tom shifted in his chair. "The warehouse capacity is fine, the shipping routes are fine, but when you put them together, there's a timing problem. The trucks arrive before the warehouse is ready, or they arrive too late and miss the delivery windows. So we redesigned the routes? We tried. Every change creates a new problem somewhere else." Eleanor felt a headache building behind her eyes. "What about different shipping companies?" "Same issues. It's not about the companies. It's about the timing between pickup and delivery." Sarah from marketing spoke up. "Can we push back the launch date?" "Absolutely not." Eleanor's voice was sharper than she intended. "We've made commitments. We have contracts. Moving the date would cost us more than fixing the problem." The room fell quiet. Eleanor looked around the table at some of the smartest people she knew. All of them were stumped. "There has to be something we're missing," she said. Marcus finished his deliveries on the 38th floor and headed back down. The building was quieter now. Most people settled into their morning routines. As he waited for the elevator, he pulled out his delivery manifest to check his next stops. The list showed addresses, times, and package sizes. Marcus had gotten good at reading these sheets quickly. You had to be efficient in this job, especially with the bigger buildings where you might have 15 stops in one place. Something about the addresses caught his eye. He looked closer at the pattern. The stops were organized by floor number, which made sense, but the timing didn't account for elevator waits or walking distances between offices. Marcus had seen this kind of planning before. Someone had designed the route based on a map, not on real experience. It looked logical on paper, but it would create delays in practice. The elevator arrived, and Marcus stepped in. As the doors closed, he thought about the conversation he'd overheard: shipping routes, timing problems, warehouses and deliveries that didn't line up. He shook his head. It wasn't his business. He was just the delivery guy. But the problem nagged at him as he drove to his next stop. Eleanor paced behind her chair, while Tom explained the shipping problem for the 3rd time. The numbers on the whiteboard seemed to mock her. Everything looked right individually, but together they created an impossible puzzle. "What if we split the shipments?" asked David from finance. "We looked at that. It doubles the shipping costs and only saves us a few days. Different warehouses? Same timing problems, different locations." Eleanor stopped pacing. "I'm going to ask this one more time. Are we absolutely certain there's no solution?" The room was quiet for a long moment. Then Tom nodded. "I've run every scenario I can think of. Unless we change the fundamental structure of either the warehouses or the shipping schedule, we're stuck. And changing either one would cost more than the 3-week delay." Eleanor sank into her chair. $100 million project, 2 years in the making, stopped by a scheduling problem that nobody had caught until now. Outside the conference room, she heard the soft ding of an elevator. Probably another delivery. The building got dozens every day. Packages, documents, supplies. All of it moved by people who understood timing and routes better than anyone. Eleanor blinked. She looked at the whiteboard again, then at the conference room door. "Lydia," she called out. Her assistant appeared in the doorway immediately. "Yes?" "Is there still a delivery person in the building?" "I think so. Marcus just made his rounds. He might still be here. Eleanor felt something click in her mind. Could you ask him to wait? I'd like to speak with him. Tom frowned. Eleanor, what are you thinking? I'm thinking maybe we're asking the wrong people for advice. Marcus was checking his next delivery address when Lydia approached him in the lobby. Excuse me, Marcus. Ms. Whitman would like to speak with you for a moment. Are you able to wait? Marcus looked up, surprised. Ms. Whitman? The CEO? Yes. She's in a meeting upstairs, but it would just take a minute. Marcus glanced at his watch. He had some flexibility in his schedule, and Frank was always telling him that good customer service meant being helpful when possible. Sure, he said. Is everything okay with the delivery? Oh, nothing like that. She just has a quick question. Marcus followed Lydia to the elevator, wondering what a CEO could possibly want to ask him. In 2 years of deliveries, he'd never spoken to anyone higher than a department manager. The elevator climbed to the 42nd floor. Marcus had never been this high in the building. The view through the windows was incredible. He could see for miles in every direction. Lydia led him down a hallway lined with expensive art and stopped outside a conference room. Through the glass, Marcus could see several people in business suits sitting around a large table. Charts and numbers covered a whiteboard. Just wait here for a moment, Lydia said. Marcus stood in the hallway, suddenly very aware of his brown uniform and clipboard. He felt like he was in the wrong place. Through the conference room door, he could hear voices again. The same worried tone he'd noticed earlier. Something about warehouses and timing and routes that didn't work. Marcus found himself listening despite trying not to. The problem they were describing sounded familiar. He'd seen similar issues in his previous job, where small changes in timing could create big problems down the line. Without really thinking about it, Marcus looked at his delivery manifest again. The route planning, the time estimates, the way stops were organized. It all reminded him of what he was hearing from the meeting. The conference room door opened, and a woman with dark hair and a sharp business suit stepped out. She looked tired and worried, but her eyes were intelligent and focused. You're Marcus? Yes, ma'am. I'm Eleanor Whitman. Thank you for waiting. She glanced back at the conference room. I know this might seem strange, but I overheard you were just making deliveries in the building. That's right. You do this route regularly? Couple years now. Eleanor nodded slowly. Can I ask you something? When you plan your deliveries, how do you decide the order? I mean, what makes a route efficient? Marcus blinked. This wasn't what he'd expected her to ask. Well, it's not just about distance. You have to think about timing and elevator waits, and when people are actually in their offices. Sometimes the shortest route on paper takes the longest in real life. Eleanor's expression changed. Something sparked in her eyes. Could you explain that a little more? Marcus glanced at the conference room, where several people were now watching through the glass. He felt awkward, but Eleanor seemed genuinely interested. It's about bottlenecks, he said. Like, if you have 5 stops on different floors, but they all need to happen during lunch hour, you're going to hit delays. The elevator gets busy. People are out of their offices. Security gets backed up. So you might plan a longer route that avoids the rush times. Eleanor was quiet for a moment. Then she asked, what would you do if you had to coordinate shipments between different warehouses and delivery companies, but the timing kept creating conflicts? Marcus thought about it. I'd probably look at when each warehouse is busiest and try to stagger the pickups. Instead of having everything happen at the same time, you spread it out so the busy times don't overlap. But what if spreading it out created other problems? Then you'd need to find the bottleneck that's causing the most trouble and work around that one first. Fix the biggest problem, then see what other problems are left. Eleanor stared at him. The hallway was completely quiet, except for the soft hum of air conditioning. Would you mind coming into the meeting for just a minute? She asked. I think you might have some insight that could help us. Marcus looked down at his uniform, then at the conference room full of executives. "Ma'am, I'm not sure I'm the right person for this." "I think you might be exactly the right person." Marcus felt every eye in the room on him as he followed Eleanor through the conference room door. The polished table reflected the overhead lights, and the whiteboard covered in numbers and charts looked like a foreign language. "Everyone, this is Marcus Reed," Eleanor said. "He handles deliveries for our building and has experience with logistics planning." A man with graying hair and an expensive tie looked Marcus up and down. "Eleanor, we're dealing with a $100 million supply chain issue. I'm not sure." "Tom." Eleanor's voice was firm. "We've been stuck on this problem for 3 hours. I think it's worth hearing a different perspective." Marcus shifted his weight from one foot to the other. The clipboard in his hand suddenly felt heavy. "Maybe I should come back later. You all seem busy." "No, please stay." Eleanor gestured toward an empty chair. "Could you look at this shipping schedule and tell me what you see?" Marcus sat down carefully, placing his clipboard on the table. The chair was leather and probably cost more than he made in a month. Eleanor handed him a printed chart showing warehouse locations, shipping routes, and delivery schedules. Marcus studied the paper for a long moment. The routes were laid out in neat lines connecting dots on a map. Times were listed in precise columns. Everything looked organized and logical. But something was wrong. "Can I ask a question?" Marcus said. "Of course." "These pickup times, they're all scheduled for 8 in the morning?" Tom leaned forward. "Yes. That's when the warehouse is open. Maximum efficiency." Marcus nodded slowly. "And the delivery windows are all between 10 and noon?" "Right. That gives us 2 hours for transport and sorting." Marcus looked at the chart again, then at the faces around the table. Everyone was watching him with expressions ranging from curious to skeptical. "The problem is that every warehouse and every shipping company is trying to do the same thing at the same time," Marcus said. "It's like having 5 delivery trucks all trying to use the same loading dock at once." Eleanor sat forward. "Go on." "In my old job, we had the same issue. Everything looked perfect on paper, but in practice, we were competing with ourselves. The 8 o'clock pickups meant we were fighting with every other company for warehouse staff time. The 10 to noon delivery window put us right in the middle of everyone else's busy period." Tom frowned. "But those are standard industry hours. That's when the system works most efficiently. For one company, maybe, but when everyone's using the same system, it stops being efficient." Marcus pulled out a pen and drew a simple timeline on the back of one of his delivery sheets. "What if you staggered the pickups? Start some at 7, some at 8, some at 9, and spread the delivery windows across the whole day instead of cramming them into 2 hours. That would require different contracts with the shipping companies," Tom said, "and some warehouses don't open until 8. "Right, but you're already paying premium rates because of the bottlenecks. Those extra costs might be less than the delays you're facing now." The room was quiet. Marcus could hear the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic from the street below. Eleanor stood up and walked to the whiteboard. "What if we mapped this out? Marcus, could you help me think through the timing?" For the next 20 minutes, Marcus found himself standing at the front of the room, explaining how workflow patterns created predictable delays. He drew simple diagrams showing how small changes in timing could eliminate conflicts. The executives asked questions, and Marcus answered them as clearly as he could. When they finished, the whiteboard looked completely different. Instead of rigid parallel lines, the new schedule showed a flowing pattern that distributed the workload across different times and locations. Tom stared at the board. This could actually work. Sarah from marketing was taking notes. The cost difference would be minimal, and we'd eliminate most of the timing conflicts. Eleanor turned to Marcus. "How long would something like this take to implement?" Marcus shrugged. "Depends on how flexible your contracts are. If you can adjust pickup times and delivery windows, maybe a week to get everyone coordinated." "A week?" Tom looked stunned. We were looking at a 3-week delay minimum. Eleanor sat down heavily in her chair. Marcus, I don't know how to thank you. You just saved us millions of dollars and probably 6 months of headaches. Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks. I just looked at it like a delivery route. Same principles. It's more than that. Eleanor's voice was soft. You saw something that none of us could see, even though it was right in front of us. The meeting ended with handshakes and promises to get contracts revised immediately. Marcus gathered his clipboard and headed for the door, but Eleanor stopped him. Marcus, could you stay for just a minute? The room emptied until it was just the two of them. Eleanor closed the door and leaned against it. I need to ask you something, she said. And please be honest. Marcus nodded. How long have you been working in deliveries? About 2 years. And before that? Marcus hesitated. I worked for a small logistics company, planning routes and coordinating shipments. What happened? The company went under during the recession. I needed work, so I started driving. Marcus looked down at his uniform. It pays the bills. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. Marcus, what you did in there. That wasn't just luck or common sense. You understand systems thinking. You see patterns that experienced executives missed. I just paid attention to what works in practice instead of what looks good on paper. Exactly. Eleanor walked to the window. Can I ask you something else? Would you be interested in consulting on logistics problems like this? Not full-time, but when we hit roadblocks. Marcus blinked. Ma'am, I appreciate the thought, but I'm not sure. I'm not talking about charity or pity. I'm talking about paying someone who's good at solving problems to help solve problems. Marcus studied her face. Eleanor looked tired, but her expression was genuine. No condescension, no fake smile. Can I think about it? He asked. Of course. Take all the time you need. Marcus headed for the door, then stopped. Ms. Whitman, can I ask you something now? Sure. Why did you listen to me? Most people in your position wouldn't have asked a delivery driver for business advice. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. Honestly, I don't know. Maybe because we were desperate. Or maybe because you were the only person in the building who actually understands how deliveries work in real life. She paused. Or maybe because sometimes the best ideas come from people who aren't supposed to have them. That evening, Eleanor sat across from her mother at their usual restaurant. Helen Whitman wore pearls and a navy dress that probably cost more than most people's rent. She cut her salmon into precise pieces while she talked about the Henderson contract. The terms are favorable, but I think we should push for better liability coverage, Helen said. These smaller companies can be unreliable. Eleanor nodded absently. Her mind was still on the morning's meeting, on Marcus and his simple solution to a complex problem. Eleanor, you're not listening. Sorry. Mom. It's been a long day. The quarterly numbers came in well, I heard. Though Tom mentioned some delays on the Phoenix project. We solved that, actually. Found a way to eliminate the bottlenecks. Helen raised an eyebrow. Oh? How? Eleanor hesitated. She could imagine her mother's reaction to the truth. We brought in some outside expertise, fresh perspective. Good. Sometimes we get too close to our own problems to see the solutions. Helen sipped her wine. I'm glad you're learning to delegate appropriately. Eleanor almost laughed. Appropriate delegation. Her mother would have strong opinions about asking a delivery driver for strategic advice. Mom, can I ask you something? Of course. When you were building the company, did you ever get advice from unexpected sources? Helen thought about it. Your father used to talk to everyone. Janitors, secretaries, truck drivers. He said they saw things that management missed. She smiled. I thought it was inefficient, but sometimes he was right. Eleanor felt a small spark of surprise. Really? Business is about people, darling. And people are often more perceptive than their job titles suggest. Helen's expression grew more serious. Though you do have to be careful about maintaining professional boundaries. It's easy to blur the lines between mentorship and friendship. What do you mean? I mean that being grateful to someone and genuinely liking someone are two different things. And both can create complications in a professional setting. Eleanor nodded, but her mother's warning felt like advice for a problem she wasn't having. Her interaction with Marcus had been purely professional. He'd solved a business problem. She'd offered him consulting work. Everything had been appropriate. But as she drove home that night, Eleanor found herself wondering about Marcus Reed. What had made him notice patterns that trained executives had missed? How had he developed such clear thinking about complex systems? And why had he been driving deliveries for 2 years instead of using his analytical skills in a more challenging role? She also wondered why she cared about the answers to those questions. Marcus sat in his small apartment, eating leftover Chinese food and thinking about the strangest day he'd had in years. The morning had started like any other Tuesday, but somewhere between the elevator and the conference room, something had shifted. He'd solved a problem that million-dollar executives couldn't solve. And Eleanor Whitman had listened to him like his ideas actually mattered. Marcus wasn't used to that kind of attention. In his previous job, he'd been one of several analysts, good at his work, but not particularly special. When the company folded, he'd sent out dozens of resumes and gotten back polite rejection letters. After 6 months of searching, he'd taken the delivery job because he needed income. The work was honest, and he was good at it. He'd planned to keep looking for something in logistics, but the job market stayed tight, and months turned into years. Now Eleanor Whitman was talking about consulting work, using his skills to solve problems for a major company. It felt like a door opening after a long time of being closed, but it also felt risky. Marcus had learned not to expect too much from opportunities that seemed too good to be true. People said things in the moment that they didn't always follow through on later. Still, when he replayed the conversation, Eleanor had seemed genuine. She hadn't talked down to him or acted like she was doing him a favor. She'd spoken to him like a professional, talking to another professional. Marcus finished his dinner and pulled out his laptop. He spent an hour researching Whitman Industries, reading about their projects and their reputation in the business community. Everything he found suggested a solid, well-managed company with fair employment practices. He also found several photos of Eleanor from business events and conferences. In all of them, she looked confident and composed, professional, successful. Marcus closed the laptop and got ready for bed, but sleep didn't come easily. He kept thinking about the moment when Eleanor had asked him to look at the shipping chart, the way she'd listened to his explanation without interrupting, the way she'd treated his ideas as valuable. It had been a long time since anyone had looked at him and seen more than just a delivery driver. The next morning, Marcus was loading packages into his truck when his supervisor approached. "Hey, Marcus. Got a message for you from that big office building on 5th. They want to confirm your delivery schedule for this week." Marcus frowned. "That's unusual. Is there a problem?" "Didn't sound like it. Just said to make sure you were still handling their route." Marcus nodded, but something felt different. In 2 years, no one from the building had ever checked on his schedule. When he arrived at Whitman Industries, Frank greeted him at the security desk with a smile that seemed knowing. "Morning, Marcus. I heard you had an interesting day yesterday." Word travels fast. "Building this size, not much stays secret for long." Frank leaned closer. "Heard you helped solve some big problem upstairs." Marcus shifted the packages. "Just answered a few questions." "Uh-huh." Frank's smile widened. "Well, Ms. Chen called down this morning. She wants to see you when you're done with your deliveries." "Lydia? What for?" "Didn't say. But she seemed excited about something." Marcus made his usual rounds, but the building felt different somehow. People smiled at him more than usual. A few executives he'd never met before nodded when they passed in the hallway. When he finished his deliveries, Marcus took the elevator to the 42nd floor. Lydia was waiting for him with an envelope and a warm smile. "Ms. Whitman wanted me to give you this," she said. Marcus opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a handwritten note on expensive paper. "Marcus, thank you again for yesterday. The solution you suggested is already being implemented, and early feedback is extremely positive. I meant what I said about consulting opportunities. If you're interested, I'd like to discuss it further. Would you be available for lunch tomorrow? Nothing formal, just conversation. Eleanor." At the bottom was her personal phone number and email address. Marcus read the note twice. Lunch with a CEO, to discuss consulting opportunities. 6 months ago, he couldn't have imagined such a thing. "She asked me to let her know if you're available," Lydia said. Marcus looked up from the note. Lydia's expression was encouraging but not pushy. "What do you think?" he asked. Lydia smiled. "I think Eleanor Whitman doesn't make offers she doesn't mean. And I think you impressed her more than you realize." Marcus folded the note carefully. "Tell her yes." Eleanor chose a small cafe 6 blocks from the office. Nothing fancy, but clean and quiet, with booth seating that allowed for private conversation. She arrived 10 minutes early and chose a table near the back, away from the lunch crowd. She'd changed clothes 3 times that morning, finally settling on dark jeans and a simple sweater. Professional, but not intimidating. She wanted Marcus to feel comfortable, not like he was being interviewed by his boss. Marcus arrived exactly on time, wearing khakis and a button-down shirt. He looked around the cafe uncertainly until he spotted Eleanor waving from the corner booth. "Thank you for coming," she said as he sat down. "Thank you for asking." Marcus seemed nervous, his hands fidgeting with the menu. "This is different from what I'm used to." "Different how? CEOs don't usually take delivery drivers to lunch." Eleanor felt a pang of something. Embarrassment, maybe, or recognition. "You're right, they don't. But maybe that's part of the problem." They ordered sandwiches for both, coffee for Eleanor, iced tea for Marcus. When the server left, Eleanor leaned forward. "I've been thinking about what happened yesterday," she said. "About why 5 experienced executives missed something that seemed obvious to you. It wasn't obvious. I just looked at it differently." "Exactly. You looked at it from the perspective of someone who actually does the work, instead of someone who manages the work." Eleanor stirred her coffee absently. "We spend so much time in meetings and spreadsheets that we forget how things actually function in the real world." Marcus relaxed slightly. "In my old job, I made that mistake too. Everything looked perfect in the computer system, but the drivers would come back and tell us about delays we hadn't accounted for. Weather, traffic, buildings with confusing layouts. Reality is messier than planning." "What made you leave that job?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "The company couldn't compete with the bigger firms. We had good ideas, but we didn't have the resources to implement them properly." He shrugged. "Small companies disappear all the time." "And you couldn't find another position in logistics?" "I tried. Sent out probably 50 resumes. Most places wanted someone with experience at major corporations, or they wanted someone fresh out of college they could train their way." Marcus took a sip of his iced tea. "I was in between. Too experienced to be cheap, not prestigious enough to be valuable." Eleanor felt something twist in her stomach. "So you took the delivery job. It's honest work, and I'm good at it." Marcus looked defensive for a moment. "There's nothing wrong with driving deliveries." "You're absolutely right. I didn't mean to suggest." Eleanor stopped. "I'm sorry. That came out wrong." "It's okay." Marcus's expression softened. "I know what you meant." They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Eleanor found herself watching Marcus, noticing details she'd missed the day before. The way he listened carefully before responding. The way he thought through problems methodically. The quiet confidence underneath his modest exterior. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said. Marcus nodded. Do you like driving deliveries? I mean, beyond it being good work. Marcus considered the question. Parts of it, yeah. I like solving root puzzles. I like meeting people in different buildings, their satisfaction in getting packages to the right place on time. He paused. But it's not. It doesn't use everything I know how to do. What would you do if you could design your ideal job? Logistics consulting, probably. Helping companies solve efficiency problems, working with different industries, learning new systems. Marcus smiled slightly. Basically what I did for you yesterday, but as a career instead of an accident. Eleanor set down her coffee cup. What if it didn't have to be an accident? What do you mean? I meant what I said about consulting opportunities. We have logistics challenges all the time. Different projects, different problems. Most of them aren't $100 million crises, but they're significant enough that solving them would save time and money. Marcus stared at her. You're serious. Completely serious. I'm not talking about charity or sympathy. I'm talking about paying someone who's good at solving problems to help solve problems. But I don't have an MBA. I don't have experience at major corporations. You have something better. You have practical knowledge and clear thinking. Eleanor leaned forward. Marcus, in 15 years of running this company, I've seen a lot of expensive consultants with impressive credentials give me advice that sounded smart, but didn't work in practice. Yesterday, you gave me advice that worked immediately. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. What would something like this look like? I'm flexible. You could keep your current job initially. Just take on projects as they come up. If it works well for both of us, maybe it becomes more formal. Eleanor pulled out a business card and wrote her personal number on the back. Think about it. No pressure. Marcus took the card and studied it. Can I ask why you're doing this? What do you mean? I mean, why are you taking a chance on someone like me? You could hire established consulting firms, people with track records. Eleanor thought about the question. Yesterday, she would have said it was purely practical. Marcus had solved a problem that others couldn't solve. But sitting across from him now, watching his careful consideration and quiet intelligence, she realized there was more to it. Because talent doesn't always come in the package we expect it to, she said finally. And because I think we make better decisions when we listen to people who actually understand how things work. Marcus nodded slowly. I'll think about it. Good. Eleanor smiled. That's all I can ask. They finished lunch talking about safer topics. The city, the weather, Marcus's observations about different buildings on his route. Eleanor found herself laughing more than she had in months. Marcus had a dry sense of humor, and a knack for finding absurd details in everyday situations. When they parted ways outside the cafe, Eleanor felt lighter than she had in weeks. The conversation had been easy, natural. No corporate posturing or careful maneuvering. Just two people talking honestly about work and life. Walking back to the office, Eleanor realized she was looking forward to Marcus's answer about consulting. Not just because he could help with logistics problems, but because she wanted to spend more time talking with him. That thought should have worried her. Instead, it made her smile. Marcus drove the rest of his route on autopilot, his mind replaying every moment of lunch with Eleanor. The way she'd listened to his ideas. The way she'd talked about talent not coming in expected packages. The genuine respect in her voice when she described his problem-solving skills. Most of all, the way she'd made him feel like his thoughts and experiences mattered. When Marcus finished his deliveries, he drove to his favorite coffee shop instead of heading straight home. He needed time to think, and the familiar noise of other conversations helped him process his own thoughts. Eleanor's offer was everything he'd hoped for when he'd first started job hunting 2 years ago. A chance to use his analytical skills. Flexible consulting work that could grow into something more substantial. Financial improvement that could help him move out of his tiny apartment. But Marcus had learned to be cautious about opportunities that seemed too good to be true. He'd been disappointed before, by employers who'd promised growth and advancement that never materialized, by interviews that had gone well but resulted in polite rejection emails, by hope that had turned into frustration and eventual resignation. This felt different, though. Eleanor had been direct about what she wanted and what she could offer. She hadn't made unrealistic promises or exaggerated the opportunity. Most importantly, she treated him like a professional throughout their conversation. Marcus pulled out his phone and stared at Eleanor's business card. Her personal number was written in neat handwriting on the back. He could text her now and accept the offer, or he could wait a few days and think it through more carefully. Before he could second-guess himself, Marcus typed a simple message. "Thank you for lunch and the opportunity. I'd like to accept your consulting offer. When would be a good time to discuss next steps?" He sent the text before he could change his mind. Eleanor's response came back within minutes. "Excellent. Are you free tomorrow evening? I could stop by after your deliveries, or we could meet somewhere neutral." Marcus smiled. Even in her excitement, Eleanor was being considerate of his comfort level. "After deliveries works fine. I'm usually done around 4:30. Perfect. I'll see you at the building tomorrow." Marcus put his phone away and finished his coffee, feeling something he hadn't experienced in a long time. Genuine excitement about his career. That evening, Eleanor had dinner with her mother again. This time, Helen had chosen the restaurant, an upscale place downtown that Eleanor found a little stuffy, but her mother loved. "You seem different tonight," Helen said over appetizers. "More relaxed. Good day at work." "The Henderson contract went well?" Eleanor nodded absently. She was thinking about Marcus's text, about the consulting arrangement they'd discuss tomorrow, about the possibility of working regularly with someone who brought fresh perspective to old problems. "Eleanor?" "Sorry, what did you say?" Helen studied her daughter's face. "I asked about the Henderson contract, but I don't think that's what has you so distracted." Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Just thinking through some staffing decisions." "Oh? What kind of staffing?" "Consulting work, bringing in outside expertise for logistics projects." "That's smart. Fresh eyes can be valuable." Helen sipped her wine. "What firm are you considering?" Eleanor hesitated. "Actually, it's an individual consultant, someone with practical experience rather than academic credentials." "Interesting. How did you find this person?" "Through work. He solved a major problem for us this week." Helen's eyebrows rose slightly. "He?" "Yes." Eleanor felt defensive without understanding why. "Marcus Reed. He has a background in logistics and systems analysis." "And you met him how exactly?" Eleanor realized she was trapped between the truth and her mother's inevitable reaction to the truth. "He was consulting on the shipping project I mentioned." It wasn't technically a lie. Marcus had consulted on the shipping project, just not in the way Helen would assume. "Well, I'm glad you found someone competent. Good consultants can make all the difference." Helen changed the subject to her bridge club, but Eleanor caught her studying her daughter's expression throughout dinner. Walking to their cars afterward, Helen took Eleanor's arm. "Darling, can I give you some advice?" "Of course." "Be careful about mixing business with personal feelings. I know you get excited about new projects, but hiring decisions should be based purely on professional qualifications." Eleanor frowned. "Of course they should be. Why would you think otherwise?" "I just want to make sure you're thinking clearly. Sometimes when we're grateful to someone, or when we find them personally appealing, it can cloud our judgment about their professional capabilities. Mom, this is a business decision. Marcus solved a $100 million problem that our entire executive team couldn't solve. His qualifications speak for themselves." Helen nodded, but her expression remained concerned. "I'm sure you're right. I just worry about you sometimes. You work so hard and you don't have much time for a social life. It would be easy to confuse professional admiration with personal attraction." Eleanor felt her face get hot. This has nothing to do with personal attraction. It's about competence and problem-solving ability. Of course it is. Helen's tone was gentle but unconvinced. Just promise me you'll maintain appropriate boundaries. Eleanor kissed her mother's cheek and got into her car, but Helen's words followed her home. Was she confusing professional admiration with personal attraction? Was her offer to Marcus influenced by feelings that had nothing to do with business? Eleanor thought about lunch that afternoon, about the way Marcus had made her laugh, about how comfortable and natural their conversation had felt, about how much she was looking forward to seeing him again tomorrow. Maybe her mother had a point. But sitting in her apartment that night, Eleanor realized she didn't care. Marcus was good at what he did, and she enjoyed his company. If those two facts were connected, so be it. She was allowed to work with people she liked, as long as she maintained professional standards, and she would maintain professional standards. This was about business, not personal feelings. Eleanor fell asleep trying to convince herself that was entirely true. Eleanor arrived at the building at 4:15, 15 minutes before Marcus usually finished his route. She felt nervous in a way that surprised her. This was a business meeting, she reminded herself, a follow-up conversation about consulting work. So why had she changed clothes twice before leaving the office? Lydia had raised an eyebrow when Eleanor said she'd be out for the rest of the afternoon, but she hadn't asked questions. Eleanor was grateful for that. She wasn't sure how she would have explained the meeting without sounding defensive. Marcus appeared in the lobby at exactly 4:30, his delivery bag slung over one shoulder. When he saw Eleanor waiting, his face lit up with a smile that made her stomach flutter in a way that was definitely not professional. "Right on time," she said. "Good habit in this job." Marcus signed out with Frank and joined Eleanor by the elevators. "Should we go upstairs?" "Actually, I was thinking we could walk. It's nice outside, and there's a park a few blocks away." Marcus looked surprised, but pleased. "That sounds good." They left the building together and walked toward the small park Eleanor had discovered during her lunch breaks. The late afternoon sun was warm, and the streets were busy with people heading home from work. "How was the rest of your route today?" Eleanor asked. "Good. Normal. Though I got a lot of questions about yesterday." "What kind of questions?" Marcus smiled. "Frank wanted to know if I was going to quit and become a business consultant. The security guards think I'm some kind of undercover expert. Mrs. Patterson on the 38th floor asked if I could look at her office filing system." Eleanor laughed. "I'm sorry. I didn't think about how word would spread." "It's okay. Kind of fun being the guy who solved the big problem for once." They reached the park and found a bench under a large oak tree. Eleanor felt more relaxed away from the building, away from the corporate environment where their different roles were so obvious. "So," she said, "tell me what you're thinking about the consulting arrangement." Marcus was quiet for a moment, looking across the park where children were playing on swings and parents sat on blankets with picnic dinners. "I'm interested," he said finally. "More than interested. But I want to make sure we both know what we're getting into." "What do you mean?" "I mean that yesterday was one problem, and I happened to see a solution that others missed. That doesn't necessarily mean I can solve every logistics problem you throw at me." Eleanor studied his profile. "Are you trying to talk me out of hiring you?" Marcus turned to face her. "I'm trying to be honest about my limitations so we both have realistic expectations." "Okay, what are your limitations?" "I don't have experience with international shipping. I've never worked on projects bigger than $50 million. I don't know much about regulatory compliance or legal requirements." Marcus counted on his fingers. "I've never managed a team or presented to a board of directors. I learn quickly, but there's a lot I don't know." Eleanor found his honesty refreshing. Most consultants she'd worked with had oversold their capabilities, leading to disappointment and wasted time. "Those are all fair points," she said. "But here's what you do have. You understand how systems actually work. You think practically instead of theoretically. You see patterns that others miss. She paused. And you're honest about what you don't know, which is rarer than you might think. Marcus smiled. So what would this look like in practice? Small projects initially. Route optimization, warehouse efficiency, delivery scheduling. Things similar to what you did yesterday, but smaller scale. Eleanor pulled out a folder she'd brought with her. I brought some examples of the kind of problems we deal with regularly. She handed Marcus a printout, showing shipping delays for their East Coast distribution center. Marcus studied it for several minutes, his brow furrowed in concentration. This bottleneck here, he said, pointing to a section of the chart. It happens every Tuesday and Thursday? Yes. How did you know that? Because those are the days when most manufacturers ship their weekly orders. You're competing for truck space and dock time with everyone else in your region. Marcus traced a line on the chart. If you shifted some of your shipments to Monday and Wednesday, you'd probably eliminate half these delays. Eleanor stared at him. We've been dealing with those delays for 6 months. 3 different consulting firms told us it was unavoidable given our volume. Maybe they were thinking about it as a capacity problem instead of a timing problem. Eleanor felt the same spark of excitement she'd experienced 2 days ago in the conference room. Marcus, would you be willing to do a formal analysis of this? I could pay you for your time, and if your solution works, we could discuss a more regular arrangement. You want to pay me to look at shipping schedules? I want to pay you to solve problems that are costing us time and money. Eleanor's voice was firm. This is business, Marcus. You have skills we need, and you should be compensated for using them. Marcus looked at the folder again, then at Eleanor. What kind of compensation are we talking about? Eleanor named a figure that made Marcus's eyes widen. It was more than he made in a month of deliveries. For one analysis that could save us hundreds of thousands of dollars in delays and inefficiencies. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. I'll do it. Good. Eleanor smiled. I'll have Lydia send you the complete shipping data tomorrow. Take as much time as you need to review it. How long do I have? No deadline. When you have ideas, we'll discuss them. They shook hands formally, but Eleanor held on a moment longer than necessary. Marcus's hand was warm and slightly rough from physical work, strong and practical. Thank you, he said, for taking a chance on me. Thank you for being worth the chance. They walked back toward the building as the sun began to set. Eleanor found herself walking slower than usual, reluctant to end their time together. Can I ask you something? Marcus said as they reached the street corner. Sure. Why are you being so careful about this being business? I mean, you keep emphasizing the professional aspects. Eleanor felt her cheeks warm. What do you mean? I mean that you could have handled this through HR or your assistant. You didn't need to take me to lunch or meet me in the park. It feels like you want to make sure I know this isn't personal. Eleanor stopped walking. Marcus's observation was accurate and uncomfortable. Is it? She asked. Personal, I mean. Marcus looked at her directly. I think we both know it's not entirely professional. Eleanor's heart sped up. Marcus, I don't want you to feel like there are expectations. I don't feel pressured. But I also don't think we need to pretend we're just discussing shipping schedules when we're both enjoying spending time together. Eleanor realized they were standing very close together on the sidewalk. Close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in Marcus's brown eyes. Close enough that she was very aware of the height difference between them, the way he was looking at her like she was more than just a CEO with a business problem. I don't usually, she started, then stopped. Mix business with personal? Date people I work with. The word date hung in the air between them. Eleanor hadn't meant to say it, but now that it was out there, she realized it was what they were talking about. Marcus smiled slowly. Is that what we're doing? Dating? I don't know, are we? I'd like to be. Eleanor felt something settle in her chest, a feeling of rightness that she hadn't experienced in a long time. So would I, she said softly. Marcus stepped closer. So what do we do about the business arrangement? We keep it professional, separate from whatever this is. Eleanor gestured between them. You do good work, you get paid for it. That happens regardless of anything personal. And the personal part? Eleanor smiled. We figure that out as we go. Marcus leaned down and kissed her, soft and careful, on the sidewalk outside Whitman Industries as the evening rush hour flowed around them. When they broke apart, Eleanor realized she was smiling wider than she had in months. I should probably get home, Marcus said. Early morning tomorrow. Of course. Eleanor felt reluctant to end the moment. I'll have Lydia send you that shipping data. I'll start working on it this weekend. They parted ways at the corner, Marcus heading toward his truck and Eleanor toward the parking garage. Eleanor found herself walking with a lightness in her step that had nothing to do with solving business problems. 3 weeks later, Marcus sat in Eleanor's office presenting his analysis of the East Coast shipping delays. His recommendations had already been implemented and were showing dramatic improvements in efficiency. Delays are down 60%, Eleanor said, reading from the latest report. Cost savings are exceeding our projections. The Monday and Wednesday shifts worked better than I expected, Marcus said. Once the other companies saw the advantages, some of them adjusted their schedules too. It created a better flow for everyone. Eleanor smiled across her desk at him. I think this proves that the consulting arrangement is working. I think so too. Over the past 3 weeks, they had found a comfortable rhythm. Marcus continued his delivery route during the day and worked on logistics consulting in the evenings and weekends. He had solved 2 more efficiency problems for Whitman Industries and was beginning to get inquiries from other companies who had heard about his work. More importantly, he and Eleanor had been seeing each other outside of work. Quiet dinners, walks through the city, long conversations about everything except business. Eleanor had introduced him to art museums and theater performances. Marcus had shown her food trucks and neighborhood cafes she'd never noticed despite living in the city for years. They had been careful to keep their personal relationship separate from the consulting work, but it was getting harder to maintain the boundaries. There's something I want to discuss with you, Eleanor said, closing the project folder. About the shipping analysis? About us. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. Over the past few weeks, he had begun to hope that what was developing between them might be more than temporary attraction. But he also knew how different their worlds were, how many practical obstacles stood in the way of anything serious. Okay, he said. Eleanor stood up and walked to the window. My mother wants to meet you. Marcus blinked. She wants to meet me? I've been avoiding family dinners for the past few weeks. She's getting suspicious about what I'm doing with my time. And you want to tell her about me? Eleanor turned around. I want to tell her about us. Marcus felt something shift inside his chest. Eleanor, are you sure that's a good idea? What do you mean? Marcus chose his words carefully. I mean that your mother might have strong opinions about you dating someone who drives deliveries for a living. Eleanor's expression hardened. My personal choices are not subject to my mother's approval. I know that. But family relationships are complicated. I don't want to cause problems between you and your mother. Eleanor sat down on the edge of her desk, closer to Marcus's chair. My mother's opinions don't determine who I care about, but they matter to you. Less than you do. The words hung in the air between them. Eleanor looked surprised that she had said them, but she didn't take them back. Marcus reached for her hand. Eleanor, I care about you too, more than I expected to, but we need to be realistic about what we're dealing with. What do you mean? I mean that people are going to have opinions about us. Your business associates, my co-workers, your family. We're going to face questions and judgments and assumptions. Eleanor's jaw set in a way Marcus was beginning to recognize. Let them have opinions. Easy to say, harder to live with. Eleanor slid off the desk and knelt beside Marcus's chair so they were at eye level. Marcus, are you having second thoughts about this? Marcus looked into her eyes and saw vulnerability beneath the determination. No, I'm not having second thoughts, but I want to make sure you're not either. I'm not. Even when your mother asks pointed questions about my background and education and career prospects. Even then. Marcus kissed her softly. Okay, when do you want to do this? Sunday dinner, if you're willing. Marcus thought about meeting Helen Whitman, about sitting at an expensive restaurant answering questions about his intentions and qualifications, about proving himself worthy of Eleanor's attention. Then he thought about Eleanor kneeling beside his chair, choosing him despite the complications. I'm willing, he said. Eleanor smiled and kissed him again, longer this time. Besides, she said when they broke apart, there's something else I want to discuss with you. What? I've been thinking about expanding the consulting program, bringing you on more formally, maybe even full-time if you're interested. Marcus stared at her. Full-time? You're good at this, Marcus. Really good. And we have enough projects to keep you busy indefinitely. Eleanor, we agreed to keep business and personal separate. This is business. You're solving problems and saving money. The personal part is separate. Marcus wasn't sure the two things could remain separate, but looking at Eleanor's excited expression, he realized he didn't care. What would full-time look like? Office, salary, benefits. Real consulting work with different companies, not just delivery optimization. Eleanor's voice was getting faster with excitement. You could build the career you actually want instead of the one you settled for. Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Genuine hope about his professional future. When would this start? Whenever you're ready. Marcus thought about his delivery route, his small apartment, the careful budgeting that had defined his life for the past 2 years. Then, he thought about working with Eleanor every day, using his skills to solve meaningful problems, building something significant together. I'm ready now, he said. Eleanor's smile was radiant. Really? Really? She kissed him again, and Marcus realized that somewhere between solving a shipping problem and falling for a CEO, his entire life had changed direction. For the first time in years, that change felt like exactly what he had been waiting for. 6 months later, Marcus Reed Consulting occupied a small office 2 floors below Whitman Industries. Marcus had 3 regular clients and a waiting list of companies interested in his services. He had hired an assistant and was considering bringing on a junior analyst. Eleanor had been right about his skills being valuable. What she hadn't anticipated was how much they would both enjoy working in the same building, sharing lunch breaks and elevator rides, collaborating on projects that used both of their expertise. Sunday dinners with Helen Whitman had become easier after the first awkward month. Helen had eventually admitted that Marcus's practical intelligence reminded her of Eleanor's father, though she still made subtle comments about appropriate professional boundaries. Marcus had learned to smile politely at these comments while holding Eleanor's hand under the dinner table. On a quiet Thursday evening, Marcus was finishing up the efficiency analysis for a small manufacturing company when Eleanor knocked on his office door. Working late again? She asked. Just finishing up. What about you? Eleanor closed the door behind her and sat in the chair across from his desk. I wanted to talk to you about something. Marcus saved his work and gave her his full attention. What's on your mind? How do you feel about what we've built here? Marcus looked around his office, with its view of the city and its shelves full of logistics textbooks and project files. 6 months ago, he had been delivering packages and living paycheck to paycheck. Now he had a thriving consulting business and was dating a woman who challenged him intellectually and cared about him completely. "I feel grateful," he said, and a little amazed that it all worked out. "It worked out because you're brilliant at what you do, and because you were brave enough to speak up when you saw a problem." Marcus smiled. "And because you were smart enough to listen." Eleanor stood up and walked around his desk. "I love you, Marcus." The words were simple, but they settled into Marcus's chest with the weight of absolute certainty. "I love you too," he said, pulling her into his arms. They held each other in the quiet office, looking out at the lights of the city where they had found each other in the most unlikely way. "What do you want to do now?" Eleanor asked. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we've proven that the business works and that we work. What comes next?" Marcus thought about the question. He had achieved professional success beyond his expectations. He had fallen in love with someone who respected his mind and supported his dreams. But standing there with Eleanor in his arms, he realized there was still something he wanted. "I want to build a life with you," he said. "Not just a career or a relationship, a real life together." Eleanor smiled and kissed him softly. "I want that too." Outside the office windows, the city hummed with the quiet energy of evening. Somewhere in the buildings below, delivery drivers were finishing their routes, executives were working late on complex problems, and people from different worlds were finding ways to connect across the distances that separated them. Marcus and Eleanor had learned that those distances were smaller than they appeared. That intelligence came in many forms, that respect could grow into love, and that the most important problems were often solved by people willing to see beyond expectations and assumptions. In a world that often felt divided by class and race and opportunity, they had found something that transcended all of those barriers. Two people who recognized each other's worth and chose to build something beautiful together. It was, Marcus thought, as he held Eleanor close, exactly the kind of love story that seemed impossible until it happened. And it was only the beginning.